Well, do you know the difference between a battery and an alternator problem? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Good afternoon, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Tony Joe's here, as he is every Friday, to take your Car Corner questions. The number to call is 1-877-913-5357. You can also go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com, send a question to the Ask Bob section, and I will get you taken care of. That's off the website, www.prudentmoney.com. 1-877-913-5357. Well, Tony Joe, how's it going?
Oh, it's going okay. How are you today?
This is a little strange because in 20 years of doing radio with Tony Joe, 20 years, we've never done a show to where he's at his place of business and I'm at in the studio. But today we had to do it that way, and so we'll try something new. How's it feel to you, Tony Joe?
Everything's good. I can hear everything. How are you hearing me? Okay.
Yeah, we're working good here. So I've got a story to tell you. Yesterday I took Grayson to the University of Arkansas for a college tour. And I was getting very low on gas, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And so finally a gas station came up, this is unlike me because I usually plan ahead as far as getting gas. I get into there and I look at the gas prices, $5.98 a gallon. Got on the road.
This was in Arkansas?
This was in Oklahoma on the way to Arkansas.
Oh, okay.
Then I get down the road about 10 or 15 miles and see $3.84. So you got to think that people who own gas stations that know those gas stations are in the middle of nowhere may be charging a little bit more. Of course, there's a big difference between those two per gallon costs.
Yeah, that is interesting. I haven't experienced, because I haven't been anywhere in a while. That is very interesting. 5 something down to
384.
384.
So the moral of the story is plan out ahead of time.
Well, I've been watching gas drop this past week, and it's been going down, but they say it's due to the lack of demand. So I see it as a scenario like this. It's a mind thing. I believe that even for me, I'm like, wow, gas is $3.90. That's below $4 a gallon. Wow. And then I think to myself, don't be stupid. I mean, wow, $4 a gallon is still $2 more than it should be, but makes you feel better. And then you tend to buy more or go places like you, for instance, chose to go on a little trip, which wasn't that far, but that's 6 or 7 hours, I assume. And
4.5.
It's going to drive the demand back up, and of course, then fuel will probably go back up with the summer travel season and the upcoming holiday for Labor Day when that rolls around. So I don't think it's going to be down for long, but let's enjoy it while it is down a little bit.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. 1-877-913-5357. That is the number to call, and I do have a line open. So a question came up, Tony Joe, that I think is people don't really consider because they think that when the car won't start that it's definitely the battery. But it could be a situation where your alternator is not functioning properly. The question is, how do you tell the difference between the two?
Here's how you can tell. If the alternator is not functioning properly, it will give you indications before it leaves you stranded. Now, and this goes back to trying to be a little more vigilant about looking at your gauges. Because when the alternator stops charging, there is some kind of an indicator on that dashboard. Now, it can differ. For instance, if you have an alternator warning light, it can light up and say a number of confusing things. It can just be a picture of a battery. It can be a picture of, or it can say charging system, or it can say ALT, short for alternator. It can say BAT, short for battery. It's a very confusing thing, and unless you know the terminology, that light can come on and you may not know what it means. So it's important. And then also you have a gauge, an actual gauge that goes from 0 to, say, 18 volts, and you need to know where normal is on that gauge, so if it drops down, you're going to know something's wrong. So just having said that, I want to explain that if you turn the key on in your car, all the lights on the whole dashboard will light up. Now, I'm not telling you to start it. I'm just saying turn the key on. If you have push-button start, you do not touch the brake, and you push the button 2 times. That's the same thing as turning the key on. And if there's any of those lights that you don't know or don't understand, that's when you need to start getting the owner's manual out so that you know. And the reason for this is because when you turn the key on, the dashboard lights all display or illuminate for a reason. We call it a prove-out. And the reason they all come on is to make sure they all work. For instance, if you turned it on and you didn't have an oil light and you ran it low on oil, what's going to warn you? We do the prove-out because we want to make sure that all the lights, all the warning lights, are capable of warning you in case of a dramatic problem. So if you're not familiar with the lights on your dashboard, it just takes a couple of minutes to familiarize yourself with the different terminology and the different insignias that are displayed. The tire monitor light looks like an upside-down horseshoe, and people don't really know what that means, and then they look it up. So it's really confusing, and they're different from year to year and model to model. So it's just up to you to know about your own vehicle, and it's not that hard to understand once you are familiar with each light and what it represents. So here's back to your question, Bob, is the battery is going to hold a certain amount of electricity or a certain amount of charge that your car needs to not only start the vehicle, but also to run the vehicle. The alternator, once the engine is running, helps supply the battery's needs and also kind of recharges what the battery lost during the starting process. So if the alternator were to go out, you will have a warning indicator. Either the gauge, instead of reading 14 volts, will drop down to 12, which is what the battery produces. That's telling you that, hey, the battery's only reading 12 volts. It should be reading higher than that. I'm used to that because I know where normal is because I've experienced it before, and now I see that it has dropped. So you need to know that. These are things that you need to familiarize yourself with. Once the alternator goes bad, you still have time, normally, to get some help, but you've got to be notified of that because once the alternator stops helping the battery, the only energy you have left is what's the reserve in that battery. And if you're using the headlights or the windshield wipers or the radio or the air conditioner, it's going to draw more power from that battery at a faster rate, leaving you less time to get help. So these are important things to know so that if you get up in the morning and your car won't start, that means the battery is low on power. How did it get low? Is the alternator not working? Or is the battery at fault? So one of the two is probably the scenario, and you're going to have to know ahead of time if your alternator goes out so that you can not blame the battery necessarily, but having foresight the night before you noticed something was wrong, then you may get it checked out before the battery goes completely dead, and then you have to have it towed. And
Well,
I
tell
know
me
that's
this.
an awful big explanation, Bob, but I'm trying to point out all the factors that are involved in helping you as a consumer to help the mechanic so that we save time and, in effect, save money in the long run.
Now tell me this. Let's say that you go to one of a number of battery shops, places that's pretty much what they do is sell batteries. How often or what percentage of the time do you think that if you take your car to one of those places that they're actually going to say, well, let's make sure it's not the battery first. Let's check it out, the electrical system and that kind of thing, or are they just going to replace the battery?
Well, oftentimes you'll run into this kind of a situation. People will naturally think because the car doesn't start, it must be something with the battery. So they go in and they buy a battery, or they go in and they want a battery put in their car. So the person that's installing the battery should have the initiative to say, like, for instance, if a customer came to me and said, I need a new battery in my car wouldn't start this morning. The first thing I would think of and ask this person would be, why do you think it's the battery? I mean, it wouldn't start, but how old is your battery? Oh, my battery's only a year old. Well, then why do you think it's the battery? I mean, don't blame something unless you're sure. And I know it's hard to, when you're in a hurry, it's hard to put the time in, but really you should check the battery first. Maybe the battery is just run down of power because the alternator's not working. Or
Hey, hold that thought, Tony Joe. We're up against a break. This is Bob Brooks, 1-877-913-5357. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to this special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. 1-877-913-5357 is the number to call if you've got a question for Tony Joe. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, Tony Joe, didn't mean to cut you off, but finish out your thought there.
Oh, it's okay. Listen, let me finish up by saying that a person should not try to make decisions without consulting at least with a mechanic, because if you have a dead battery and your car won't start and you go buy a battery on your own and you install it and then it starts up and goes and then the next day you have the same problem, then you just probably wasted money on a battery. And batteries are not inexpensive anymore. They used to be what I considered somewhat inexpensive. Now they're getting up there $150 per battery. So you want to be careful of making poor decisions with your money like that, it is better to just talk to somebody first who maybe can test the alternator. A lot of the auto places that you go to that sell batteries can also test the car to see if you really need a battery. And that's what I would recommend somebody do before they make a decision on their own.
1-877-913-5357. So tell us this, Tony Joe, what is the cost of an alternator? I know that varies obviously by car, but about how much are you going to spend to replace an alternator?
I would say on average, if you had an alternator replaced and it was, and Bob, let me preface this by saying some are a lot less labor intensive. So
Right.
The cost is going to vary, but on average, $400 to $500, I would say, would be about the norm that you would see on an average alternator. Today's vehicle has a very powerful alternator that create a lot of energy, and the price is higher because the demand is higher on the energy that it's going to need. That's why, because we have power windows, we have power defrosters, power seats, heated seats. All these things require more energy. So the alternators are bigger and more expensive than ever before, and sometimes the labor on an alternator can cost as much as the alternator, depending on the location. So it's easy to get references. You can look it up online, and you can get averages here and there. What my car, 19 so and so, or 2022, or 2011, whatever your car is, you can punch it in, and you can kind of get a general idea of what the average would be for that vehicle.
So is it easy to come to the conclusion that for the health and longevity of an alternator to be the best it can be is how you take care of the battery?
That's it. Exactly correct. Alternator, if you replace the battery before it goes bad, it makes the alternator overwork itself to the point of getting all the parts hot inside the alternator and really making that alternator overheat and maybe burn out. If you just have the battery tested once in a while and have it replaced when it's needed, you may never actually have to replace an alternator in the whole life of the car. So the alternator life is dependent on the battery and how you handle that situation.
So do you find that obviously it's easier to put off by replacing a set of tires, for instance, than it is a battery? If you're starting to see warning signs, it's probably something you should get done right away.
Yes, I would say that if you, being the person, the primary driver of the car, you're the one that always starts it up every morning. You hear the way it normally sounds. If you hear something different, if you hear something that doesn't sound correct, if you hear something that bothers you a little bit, it might be time to just check the battery, because the cars today are so fuel efficient, and some of these small 4-cylinders don't require a lot of energy to turn over and start. So you can have a battery going bad before it really causes you too much trouble. It can kind of get weaker and weaker and weaker, but the car will still start. And once it starts, you think, okay, I'm on my way. Well, if it doesn't sound right, then it's time to at least have it looked at. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to need a new battery, but if it doesn't sound right to you, that's, in my opinion, the biggest tool that I have to work with is the person that drives that car every day. I use his brain as a tool to say, it didn't sound right to you? What does it sound like? Well, it just sounds not normal. Weak, kind of. Okay, there you go. So now we start checking things, because that's exactly what you're looking for from the customer.
And so even though it claims, maybe 60 months, probably the average life of most batteries is what, 3-4 years?
Right. In my experience, and let me explain this really quickly, we have to worry about the global economy now. So cars are sold all over the world, different countries with extremely different climates. And in my experience, after working 42 years right here in Dallas-Fort Worth, I have experienced that after about 3 years, the battery should be tested, and don't be surprised if it's on the weak side, like the borderline point of weakness, because even though there may be a 60-month warranty on the battery, that does not mean it's going to make it the full 60 months or 5 years. And if you want to kind of put a scenario in your head, think about living in San Diego, California, as compared to living in Dallas, Texas. In San Diego, let's say it's 72 degrees all year round, and it's nice, the weather's nice, it's not too harsh usually it's not too harsh any time of the year. But in Dallas, you've got the summers like we're having right now, where you're sitting on a highway in stop-and-go traffic due to an accident, your air conditioner's running, you've got the radio on, you are putting a lot of stress on that car, and the heat under that hood is building to the point where the battery water or the acid water mixture in the battery can actually start to boil. It's just really warm under there. And it evaporates at a rate that's not good for the life expectancy of the battery to go the full 5 years. Now, they're maintenance free. A lot of them you can't check the water, you can't add water. Sometimes it's not necessary anyway, because the battery itself is degrading to the point where its abusive environment has taken some of the lifespan out of that battery. And really, in this climate that we have in the summer in Dallas, 3 years, anything after that is icing on the cake. I hope you get it. I hope it works out for you. But after 3 years, you at least need to really have it scrutinized to see if that battery is still up to the job.
So if you get a battery tested, do you? And I don't know. Obviously, don't know how to read one of those machines. But where does it have to be that you go, definitely? If you continue to use this, you can continue to use this battery, but you might jeopardize the health of the alternator or compromise.
You don't. Once the battery tests low for any reason, and the way you do it, the proper way to do it would be to fully charge the battery, so it's at a 100% state of charge. Then you let it set for a while and let some of that surface charge bleed off so that it's at a normal working environment. Now, you put a load test machine on that battery and you put it under a load, or what you would think of as kind of a stress test. If it drops below a certain voltage during that stress test, then it is not able to do its job anymore. Sometimes it'll get down almost to the voltage, and that's what we call borderline. Can you still continue to use it? Yes, it'll still start your car, but remember, the lower or weaker that battery is getting, the alternator is providing a lot more energy to keep the electrical demands of the car so that the customer can have everything that they need. If the battery's getting weaker, the alternator's working harder. When the alternator has to work harder than it was designed to work due to a battery that just won't charge up and is not in good health, then the alternator will then overwork itself, and eventually you're going to not only need a new battery, you're going to need a new alternator. And that is not fun, because it's hard to explain to customers, and it's hard to understand unless you've been doing mechanical work for a long time, unless you've seen that before. It's very hard to tell someone that you need an alternator and you need a battery. And then when you explain it to them, if they don't understand completely, it seems like they're getting ripped off. And that's really not the case. If you ever encounter that, this is why you would encounter that situation. What we've previously explained is how that scenario can actually take place.
You know, it's situations like that I keep coming back to, and I say a lot on the radio, is that you really need to have a mechanic that's a trusted resource, because at the end of the day, you got to trust what they say.
Well, yes, in fact you do, and it's not just mechanics. I mean, let's face it,
I
we
see.
don't
Yeah,
know about the human
right.
body the way a doctor does. We don't know about finances the way a money manager does. We don't know about, electricity wiring in our house. We kind of have to find someone that we can rely on. It's nice to
Okay.
know you can
Hey,
trust.
Tony Joe, that's the music, so I got to let you go. Hey, thank you for your
Okay.
information today. This is Bob
Thanks for
Brooks.
allowing me to do the
Please
program.
if you have a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.